At the time of the great trade boom, products from very distant lands arrived in Crete, such as ivory, pearls, earthenware, Khittite from China, marble from Scandinavia, etc. Child says that records from Mesopotamia speak of imports of Cretan textiles after 2000 BC, but not before this date. The Cretans exported the products of their craft, among which pottery is the most numerous. Cretan pottery is found all the way to Transylvania. John Fine says, "There was enlightenment in Crete many times brighter than in Greece, and Cretan enlightenment is in the second millennium BC strongly influenced Greek." Several places with the name Minova and Minyani are located on the shores of Pelag, such as Sifnos, Amorgos, Megara, Delos, Laconia, Sikel, and Arabia. The boyars of Pylos, Orchomenus, Thebes, Tyrnis, Mycenae, and Vaphia became kings and built courts adorned with Cretan frescoes and ornaments imitating the court of the Knossos. The streets of Knossos were cobbled or paved. The oldest known theatres were in Crete, built in a garden with stone seats, rocks, and porches. This way of building the theatre was taken over from them by other nations, including Greeks. Sport games were held in Crete, which were later known as the Olympic Games. Meno introduced them to his son when the Greeks mentioned him as Androgenus. The games were presided over and Mazda, awards for the athletes, were chaired by the commander of the Cretan war forces, Tartan, when the Greeks mentioned him as Taurus. Of the two mountains named Olympus, none was in Greece. One was in Macedonia and other in Mysia or Asia Minor. In Macedonia, those games were held at the right foot of Mount Olympus, in town of Divon, and they called them Divon Games. We have already mentioned that Greeks called the Cretans and other Serbian tribes which were engaged in seafaring on Pelag Phoenixes, that is, sunburned. Bohardius says, "Ludorum nomine Phoenices etiam missos intellexis puto et cares." That is, the Phoenicians were called the Lydians and Meses and the Cari. These were all tribes known for their navigation and for holding telesocracy. Waddell says, "Phoenicians are Aryan in race, language, and script." Speaking of these Phoenicians, Bohardius describes in detail where they arrived as sailors and had ports of migration, so he lists Cyprus, Egypt, Cilicia, Pisidia, Caria, Rhodos, Bithynia, Thrace, Samoras, Crete, Greece, Illyria, Sicela, Sardinia, Spain, and Balearics. Africa to Gad and beyond, Gaul and Cassiter Islands, British Isles, Tula, Arabia, and the Persian Gulf. A Cretan nobleman named Radamant came through Boeotia and ruled there as a Karan or king. Another nobleman, Sarpedon, went to Lyca in Asia Minor and was the ruler of this country. Radamant's court in Boeotia was located in Orchomenus. The Greeks called them Minyans. For centuries, Crete played the role of statma in eastern Pelag for Serbian tribes during their naval expeditions to Egypt and the Middle East. The attacks of so-called maritime people came mainly through Crete. Nancy Sanders dedicated one book to the maritime people in which she concluded, like all the other scholars who dealt with this issue, that the place of departure of those tribes was on the Danube. She says, "The great invasion of the Danube that conquered Mycenae and many other cities reached all the way to Egypt like that mysterious maritime people that terrified Ramses III so much. The reason for those movements was actually overpopulation in the Nubian region. The main role in this naval invasion is attributed to Serdans, that is, the Serbs. Their accomplices were in fact their compatriots who are mentioned in under local and tribal names. Sanders said that Shardans, appeared in Egypt garrison as professional soldiers, in Palestine in early 14th century BC when they heard about them in Byblos, and again in 13th century BC without the marks of their homeland. In ancient history of Cambridge, it is written that the Sardans were known as mercenaries in Egypt in the time of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. This is the time from 1408 to 1372 BC. Gordon Childe says, the first northerners to appear were the Chardans, and Shirdana in the records of Tel el Amarna around 1400 BC. The same document mentions Danun, reminiscent of the Greek Danes, but this name seems to refer to the tribe inhabited by Canaan. The Shakals mentioned here around the same time may be the Jackals. Early the 13th century BC, Shardana is mentioned again, this time as mercenaries of Ramses II. This mercenary unit was formed by prisoners of war in the previous war on the western border of the Nile Delta. They were Ramses' guard in a Syrian campaign in 1487 BC, when the alliance of the tribes of Troy was defeated. Then in 1229 BC, the Sardans, along with the Jackals, Tursha, Akyushasa, Luca, and Libyans, were defeated by Pharaoh Morneptah on the western border of Egypt. In this time of Pharaoh Morneptah, around 1224 BC, there was an attack from Libya and northerners who came from all countries. In the time of Ramses III, around 1186 BC, there was a great attack from the Great Sea and land. About the attacks from the 13th and 12th centuries BC, there are notes in Karnak and Luxor. Sanders says that the Great Wars 1220 to 1150 BC caused the decline of Egyptian influence, the fall of the Hattush Empire, and the abandonment of Hattusha as the capital city. Then he says a little further, one of the best armies that Egyptians employed were Sharden or Shardana. They attacked the Nile Delta sometime before Ramses II's northern campaign. An obelisk from Tanis reads, Shardan on the battlefield and their warships in the fog of the sea. Since that time, the Sardans have been part of the Egyptian army and fought at Kadesh. Olga Lukovic wonders, didn't the northern Serbs, together with the southern Serbs, make a joint campaign against Egypt? The northern ones came with ships and the southern ones came by land because the whole territory of Helm and Asia Minor was inhabited by Serbs at that time, so they encountered neither racial nor linguistic obstacles. Sanders says that the Sardans who lived in northern Syria and they arrived on the shores of Pelag from there. There is no doubt that the Serbian names it was spread throughout the Aryan area, even in the northern Syria. Sanders says that the bull's horns on Sardan's helmet are signs of deity. This is an accurate remark, since these horns were symbol of worship of god Buck. We have already talked about the island of Sardinia and how it got its name, and Sanders in his own way confirms that when he says that the Sardans gave their name to the island of Sardinia. Her statement that the conquerors of the islands of Sardinia came from Tyre in Phoenicia attracts attention. Bohardius notes that in western Sardinia there is a river called Servi. The name of this river can be read literally as Serbian. We have already talked about the city of Tyre, Sur, so we will add some details. Bohardius says, Tyrenos pro Tsurin, as the Jews call them, is Tyris. The Palestinians are called Philistine by the Jews, then the Philistines and the Hagarites. We have two important factors here. First, the name Tiraca is spelled in the same way as Rassena in Italy, which the Jews called Tsurini. The second is the name of the Philistines, Agareni. On several examples and everywhere it is proven that the name Agriani, Agareni, Agramni and the like hides a Serbian name that is distorted to such extent that it cannot be recognized. As for the name Tyr, Bohardius continues. Some call Tyrus Sara after some fish, and the writers Kodam, who in their language call Sar. The Romans called Tyr Saran, Peonos Sara Orindos, Stephan, the people of Soranos, in Hebrew Sor, as Tyr is called by the writers of the Holy Scriptures, Jews call Tyr Tzor, so this name Romans write with the starting letter Sima, and Jews with Tzade, and Greeks with Tau.